All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Grace Corrigan. I'm the employment specialist at INCIGHT. And as you heard, the workshop is being recorded. Before we start, I'd like to share a little bit about INCIGHT. Our mission is changing hearts and minds, leveraging obstacles, and unlocking potential. And we do this through our education and employment programs, which focus on helping individuals with disabilities and barriers. If you'd like to learn more about our programs and services, you can visit our website, which is insight.org, or you can give us a call. Jobsnow.org is a component of our employment program. And one way we support job seekers is through these GetAhead events, which are standalone workshops that provide individuals of all abilities and with valuable tools and resources for their job search. And if you want to explore some past workshops focused on essential skills, you can visit our website, which is jobsnow.org, and click on the Get Ahead tab. INCIGHT also hosts in-person job fairs, and our next event is on Thursday, July 9th at Clark College in Vancouver. And you can secure a spot by visiting our jobsnow.org webpage and click on the job fairs tab. So our workshop today is titled Standing Out in the Era of AI. You're welcome to keep your cameras on, but please keep your microphones muted during the presentation to reduce background noise. If you have questions, you can submit them in the chat and we will address them as soon as possible. And then after the presentation, we're also going to have a little time for question and answers as well. So today I'm pleased to introduce Claire Martin. She is the Director of Employment Engagement at Willamette University. And Claire, I will now hand the workshop over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And just to confirm, thumbs up, everyone can see my screen. Amazing. Thank you so much for having me today. I will be able to keep a little bit of an eye on the chat, but as Grace said, we'll have plenty of time at the end for any questions. And Grace, if there's a question that comes in and I miss it, feel free to interrupt me. Um,
Absolutely, will do.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. And again, as Grace said, I'm Claire Martin, the Director of Employer Engagement at Willamette University. I'll get into a little bit more of my background as we go through the workshop. I really like to do these types of workshops and presentations through the lens of storytelling. And today it will be a little bit about my experiences and sharing the insights that I've gained throughout my experience. And so for our agenda today, we'll go through a quick high-level overview of what I'm hoping you'll gain from this workshop. I'll share some insights around how AI is kind of changing the recruiting landscape right now, both for recruiters and the impact that it has on all of us as candidates. I'll share a little bit on how I see getting ahead of the curve, primarily using yourself, your own unique lived experiences as a professional brand to help you get into the industry or the job that you are seeking. We'll do that through identifying transferable skills, and then I'll have a recap, and again, we'll have some time for Q&A. And so for a high-level overview, this is what I am hoping we will gain from the workshop today. I won't read everything on the slide, and again, you'll have access to all of the slides at the end. But the job market is changing quickly. And understanding today's recruitment landscape can really help you as a candidate stay competitive and confident in your job search, where, especially with the job market right now, it's very easy to feel discouraged and lose a little bit of steam. And I fully feel that from firsthand, not too long ago, having been in the job search myself. And so this workshop will provide some practical insights and strategies to help you stand out, strengthen your professional brand, and essentially better position yourself for future opportunities that you see fit. Um, I'd like to begin again by talking about myself, but truly sharing these insights with you based on my experiences, not only as a recent job seeker, but also based on my 10 years of experience in recruitment and talent acquisition. And so I started my career journey actually as a student employee at my university's Central Human Resources office. Human resources wasn't my intended path, but it was close enough to what I wanted to do, which was going to law school and going into some type of law. I was looking at employment law and maybe going into public sector work. So and in HR, I used the same skills and knowledge that I would have when if I were to have gone to law school. And that was primarily what kept me in human resources for the past 10 years. The work was still centered around policies, regulations, law, and ethics, all things and transferable skills that I was seeking when I was hoping to go to law school. And I was fortunate enough after my time as a student employee to receive a full-time offer after I graduated. And after some consideration, I accepted because, again, it was very transferable to what I wanted to do in law. And I figured law school will always be there. I could always go back if I wanted to. And with a job, I could save some money in the meantime. And again, it's been 10 years and haven't looked back. I've stayed in HR, didn't end up going to law school. And it's honestly been a pleasant surprise and a pivot to my career path. And so I ended up staying at the University of Oregon in Central HR for about 4 years before becoming an HR business partner at Amazon, using the same transferable skills in HR business partner work. You're still dealing with a lot of regulations, policies, procedures. And then I was also gaining some new skills, primarily communication, conflict resolution, developing my leadership skills. And all of that allowed me to move internally to their university recruiting team at Amazon, where I dove deeper into recruitment, primarily for early career talent. And I started sharing publicly my own story on how I transitioned from a law path into HR. And after about 2 years, I was actually reached out to on LinkedIn from sharing my story and joined New Relic, a local software company in Portland, as a recruiter. And throughout those years in recruitment, AI was really starting to become a big topic. It was around 2018, 2019, before COVID, and um, AI was really starting to increase its presence in recruitment. And with the thousands of applications we received for each role, people assumed we would be using AI to screen applicants. And so when you think about AI in recruiting, when you hear AI is being used in recruitment, what do people typically think about? I think most people tend to think about assessments, recruiters not reviewing resumes, or real people not reviewing their materials. And this one I love hearing all the time. How do I optimize my resume for the AI in applicant tracking systems? That one gets me every time. Because from my experience and from continuing to talk with recruiters, behind the scenes is very different from the external perception of how AI is being used in recruitment. And while AI is being used, it's mostly being used at the front of the funnel, meaning it's used to source and find candidates. Like, for example, on LinkedIn, using filters to find keywords in user profiles, auto scheduling interviews to minimize the time recruiters have to manually schedule interviews. And this disconnect has really created huge implications in the way companies are recruiting and the way candidates apply. And as you can see, I added this kind of last data point because you're catching me at a good time. I just came back from the NACE conference, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And from talking with employers, they found 71% of recruiters encounter AI generated misrepresentations in candidate materials, meaning candidates are using AI to assist them in writing resumes and cover letters, which is fine to totally use. But then coming in the interview, recruiters are finding it's more difficult to find candidates that can then communicate and articulate the experiences that they've shared because they're relying on AI. And with the rise in AI, it's easier to apply to job postings. With the status of the job market, we tend to apply for anything and everything, which makes sense. It's what I did when I was laid off, and I'll get into that a little bit. Um, and what recruiters are seeing is an increase in applications, um, and the increase in volume of applications. And I'm talking going from maybe a couple hundred of applications to thousands of applications for any given role. And so it's getting harder to distinguish not only the qualified candidates, because let's face it, we're applying to things that we are qualified for. Some of us may be way overqualified for because it's the state of the job market. But because of this increase, it's more difficult to find the candidates that also align with the role and the organization itself, especially considering the rise in AI tools, again, that help candidates write their resumes, or other materials. And working primarily in higher education, I do see this most often with students or those early in their career, because they're all taking the same classes, using the same AI tools, and so their materials end up looking very similar. And so thinking back to that 71% of recruiters percentage, recruiters are more hesitant to consider that resume because it looks similar to all the others, because they think that AI wrote their resume. And so recruiters will actually tend to discount some of those materials and those candidates because they don't want to take some of that time interviewing when 71% is potentially misrepresented on those materials. And so while AI is being used, it's mostly, again, being used at that front of the funnel, um, and, and not during the actual screening or review of the resumes. And so furthermore, you may be aware that there's also a rise in using AI for interviews, whether it's the recruiter using AI, or maybe there isn't even a recruiter and you're answering questions through a chat box. Um, I don't hear this too often, but I do usually hear it when it's companies like startups, or smaller companies who may not have the bandwidth to have recruiters or the budget, honestly, to have recruiters reviewing resumes and applications. But candidates have also been found to use AI in a myriad of ways, some ethically and others not so much. But the disconnect really deepens when other layers are added, such as people who have disabilities and use AI as an accommodation. And I truly could talk for a whole other hour on accommodations in the recruitment process. So I'll have to restrain. But I do recommend that if you are using AI at any point during the recruitment process due to a disability, that it may be more beneficial for you to be transparent as much as you're comfortable doing so with that recruiter in order to leave out the guesswork of are they using AI to quote unquote cheat during the interview? Because there aren't that clear of policies or procedures to navigate those situations internally for recruiters. And it depends on the individual candidate, on how comfortable they want to share, how much they want to share, or what types of tools that they are using. And so the process of recruitment is beginning to change in order to adapt to some of these new technologies. And so recruiters, again, needing to navigate through these changes, are going back to some kind of basics in some ways. And so navigating the new landscape of AI, we found that recruiters are really going back to in-person connection to source for talent. So this job fair that Grace mentioned is a great place to go in order to physically meet some of these recruiters. While I was at my conference last week, I actually heard from many recruiters from large to mid-size, I would say, employers that if they don't meet you, whether it's in person or virtually, they're less likely to review your application or consider you moving forward. Because again, it is trying to take out that guesswork of are you not only qualified, but are you also the right person for this specific role at our organization? Do we align in that way? Recruiters are also building stronger partnerships with universities or professional organizations, again, like INCIGHT. So it's great that you are all here and participating and using the resources that you do have, because again, it's one of the ways recruiters are mitigating some of that risk in some way. They're also utilizing referrals more heavily. And so definitely lean in on your own network to help you find opportunities, be referred to opportunities. Again, it's all about mitigating the risk on the recruiter side. They're also verifying on LinkedIn. This is not necessarily something new, but it is being more heavily used. While you may submit a resume, a cover letter, I would say 98% of the time, recruiters are going directly to LinkedIn to verify you as one, if you're a real person, and then two, looking a little bit more deeply as to who you are as a person. Resumes are typically one page, cover letters are typically one page. You don't get the full picture of a candidate just from those materials typically. And because there's much more of an emphasis on this idea of fit for a role, recruiters and employers alike are relying on LinkedIn to verify some of that information for their candidates. They're also using skills assessments. This is also not necessarily new, but it is becoming more widespread, I would say, across many different types of roles, where I think you'd usually hear this for technical roles, but now they're being used in other types of positions as well, again, to verify the skill levels of their candidates. And then even in-person interviews, having your camera on during interviews, all to mitigate the risk of AI being used. Are you a real person? Are you consistently looking off your screen, typing a question into ChatGPT to get an answer? All of these things recruiters are doing to, again, mitigate the use of AI in recruiting. And really, the main phrase that I continue to hear from recruiters and employers is bringing the human aspect back into recruitment processes. And I really felt this deeply when I was at New Relic, and I was starting to post a little bit more and share my experiences on LinkedIn. We were getting over the main years of COVID and slowly getting back into in-person events. And again, by this time, I felt more secure in my position, not just as a recruiter, but also as a program manager for early career programs and as a leader in the organization. And I was also in a different phase of my life by that time. I didn't consider myself as early in my career as I used to, so I was more comfortable sharing publicly on LinkedIn my experiences. And so as I started posting, not always about recruitment, but also about things that I genuinely cared about, and sometimes my own personal lived experiences, having a chronic illness, invisible disabilities, being neurodivergent. And I was pleasantly surprised when my own voice led me to new opportunities. Opportunities like this one, where I started to find, and not only I started to find, but others found value in not only the skills that I could bring, but the passions that I also had and the way I blended those two together. And so I began speaking on panels, primarily for students or within universities, and built my own separate reputation outside of my job title at my employer, my own brand that really demonstrated who I was as a professional. And I became a mentor to students. I have continued to champion diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and essentially kept saying yes to opportunities as they came my way. And after 3 years at New Relic, the tech industry, I was laid off November 12th, 2024. I will always remember. And at first, I definitely felt that panic set in. And I was in that moment of applying for everything and anything I could for months. And I just kept getting rejection after rejection after rejection. Um, and again, that really started to take its toll on me as a job seeker. And so I knew I had to change my approach. And so to get ahead of certain things, I took some time to reflect. And I split the way that I applied to different positions into two buckets. I had a high volume with low impact bucket and a low volume with high impact bucket. And essentially, high volume, low impact was the category of roles that I was familiar with, knew I could do, qualified, maybe overqualified for, but maybe wasn't necessarily what I wanted to continue doing. For example, continuing being a recruiter in the tech industry. It was a tumultuous time for tech, and so I wasn't necessarily enthused to go back into that industry, but I felt comfortable applying for those roles. And then the low volume, high impact is truly what made a difference in my ability to find opportunities as a job seeker. Those were the roles that I wanted to move into within different industries and companies I wanted to be in. And so, how did I decide what those were? Um, it was a time in my life where I was valuing my own impact and my own well-being over anything else. Where earlier on in my career, I was all about the hustle and making money and the compensation. And so I reflected on my previous experiences and identified specifically the skills that I had, not necessarily the job titles, responsibilities, or the tasks, but truly the skills themselves. I also thought about what I enjoyed doing. I loved working with students. I also loved animals, my community. I had a passion for helping people with disabilities, chronic illness. And so I looked for places and roles where I could apply the skills I've gained in areas that I had a passion for. And it was what I like to call the road less traveled. Um, I've been asked this question as a recruiter from a student who was a computer science major. And they asked me one day, should I be applying for roles outside of the tech industry? And I had to pause for a second because I thought, well, of course you should. Software engineers are everywhere. But to that person, to that student, and oftentimes when you have blinders on or have a specific path you want to take, you may not be thinking about these other possibilities or again, the path less traveled. And so that's where I started looking. I started looking at nonprofits to work for. I started looking at organizations that, again, I was passionate about. For example, one of my chronic illnesses is having lupus, and I was looking at different lupus foundations to work for and bring my skills into a place where I was passionate. And oftentimes they have less candidates, less applications, because again, it's the road less traveled. And so I was looking for those places, really wanting to find somewhere I can make an impact, uh, somewhere I was passionate about. And so it was really finding that intersection of my skills that I've gained throughout my experiences and what I was passionate about, what I wanted to do, who I wanted to help. And so in the meantime,
Claire,
yes.
before you go on, I do have Eddie. He's asked for folks who are looking for their first job or entry-level positions in industries like retail or food service, do you think it's important to have a LinkedIn profile?
Oh, that's a great question. I definitely think it doesn't hurt to have a LinkedIn profile. Again, it can help you find additional opportunities and roles that are in food service, hospitality, retail, all of those types of jobs really do have the top transferable skills that companies are looking for. Um, you think of time in retail, and I had, probably 15 years before my career in retail. And you gain all these different skills that you can highlight on your LinkedIn profile if you're looking to continue navigating your career path. So yes, definitely, I think it's very valuable to have a LinkedIn profile. Yeah, thank you for that question. All right. And so in the meantime, um, as I was going through my job seeking journey during what I like to call my laid off era, I really leaned into my transferable skills. And thanks to my network, I was able to get various contracting work as a career coach, different types of speaking opportunities like this one. And it sounds cheesy. Um, but I started giving presentations about being more than your job title and leaning into your own unique brand, which really doesn't have to be difficult. I don't think I was doing anything extraordinary, and ultimately it did pay off. And so I do find that, you know, being more than your job title, again, it's about this transferable skills. Thinking about what you can do to get ahead of the curve and thinking beyond your job title. And so after 9 months of being laid off, taking contract roles, my current position that I'm in as the director of employer engagement at Willamette University, it opened. And I actually wasn't the one to find this role. And so, kind of, how did I find it? Someone at the university who I hadn't met before, but they followed me on LinkedIn for 2 to 3 years. Um, and mainly because I posted about university recruitment, sent it to me and said, "We've never met. I've followed you for some time now. This role opened up at my university, and I think you'd be a great fit. You should apply." And I did. And a few months later, after a few rounds of interviews, where I really contextualized my prior experience to fit that specific role, I got the job. And it wasn't because I had worked in higher ed before, because let's face it, that was 10 years ago and things have changed since then. Having worked on the industry side as a recruiter definitely helped, but it wasn't a clear jump forward into this role. And I really had to explain and articulate how those experiences fit into this role and this university specifically. And so I'll share some of these additional points on how I reflected some of the questions that I asked myself when I was preparing to make this type of pivot. And what I would recommend you asking yourself as well, and to practice too. Not only was I doing this and, recruiters having this idea of putting the human back into recruitment, I was also putting the human back into my own practices as a candidate. And we're always a potential candidate, whether we need a job, whether we're looking for a job currently or not. Um, you can always present yourself in a certain way that keeps you open to some of these opportunities and not being closed off or having those blinders on. And so attending workshops like these, attending other events, I'll keep saying it, attend that job fair in person. It really will pay off. And engage with other professionals and employers. You can join other types of groups, professional networks, utilize your own network, not only for opportunities, but these individuals that are part of these groups can also help you identify those skills and help you put them on your resume, practice communicating them in interviews. Because something I do hear often from candidates, and going back to, I have retail experience, food service experience. How does this translate to what I want to do? Sometimes you need an external perspective to find those skills and pull them out for you, to give you a different perspective. And so utilizing your network to do so can really give you that edge and get ahead of the curve. And then put these into practice. Identify what your two buckets are. What's your high volume, low impact, your low volume, high impact. Take the time to reflect and think about really what you want to do with the skills that you have and align it with what you are currently valuing in your employment. What you're valuing now may be different than what you valued early on in your career. And it may change as you continue to move on in your career. And so I think having that flexibility and adaptability is really what can make a difference in your career journey and your approach as a job seeker. And so that is kind of how I will wrap up and finish off. Um, Thank you so much. I really could probably continue talking forever, but I do want to make sure I leave some time to answer specific questions that you may have. Um, and please connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to answer additional questions and chat with you more. But I will pause and open it up for any questions.
Hey, Claire, Andy has typed in the chat, how has the process of finding a contract position with an agency changed?
Yes. So a contract position with an agency. It really depends on the type of agency you're looking for. So, or working with, I should say. There are third-party agencies that work with an organization to fill certain types of roles. And those are really great agencies to use when you're looking for something, especially something more immediate, because those third-party agencies are used typically to fill roles quickly. I think where it could get difficult is because they're third party, they may not be as familiar with the role or the organization. So I definitely recommend doing your own additional research if you're working with a third party agency. There are also contract positions that organizations hire for directly. Um,
Mm.
for example, there are many in the public sector that are contract temporary roles. And those are typically hired directly from that organization and not through a third party. And those are, since they're direct to hire, you typically get more information from those job descriptions and throughout the interview process. So I think there's two different ways to go through an agency and find a contract position. I think both are valuable and helpful, just depending on what you're looking for specifically.
Okay, Anne has asked, you have mentioned industries change. I'm searching for an admin assistant. Is that industry changed? Why am I having difficulty looking for
Mm.
work in that specific area?
hmm Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think there are certain positions that are changing, not necessarily an industry change, but more of job roles change, where there is still need for administrative assistance, but much of that work is being used through AI. For example, I mentioned recruiters use AI for auto scheduling certain things. Um, Recruiters use AI for automated communications to candidates. And so, similarly to administrative assistant type of roles, AI can be used to do some of those things that typically an admin assistant would do manually. And so, while I think that the rise in AI may be leading to a decrease in those types of roles, I think being able to utilize AI to enhance your ability to be an admin assistant. So, for example, being familiar with different AI softwares to automate communication, automate calendar scheduling, uh, can really boost your skill set and be more applicable to how that role is changing with the rise in AI. Um, so yes, likely having difficulties because the amount of those roles are probably decreasing due to AI. But I think something you could potentially work through to make yourself a more competitive candidate is increasing your skill set in AI in some of those ways to automate certain tasks and responsibilities.
All right, Fonnie said he's not able to scan your QR code to connect on LinkedIn, and he's
Ah,
just asking if you can provide the link in the chat.
I definitely can.
Then we have a question from Janine, and she's asking, do we need to put a QR code on our resumes?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think you necessarily have to put a QR code on your resumes. If you're trying to link, for example, your LinkedIn, I usually find that it's better to have your actual LinkedIn URL copy and pasted into your resume. The reason being is different applicant tracking systems and the way you upload your resume. If you have a link on your LinkedIn, sometimes recruiters aren't able to click on that link. And so having the full URL to copy and paste is usually the most helpful. I say that although I shared a QR code. So, but I did just put mine in the chat.
Yeah, most resumes I ever see, they just have the URL link at the top or their contact information.
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of resumes. I've never seen a QR code on them. So, North Star Clubhouse, I believe they have a group. And if you would tell me how many you have in your group, that would be great. But they're asking, how can one best reflect gaps in employment in their resume? Say if someone has to take time off during an acquired disability, how can our resumes reflect that to not be immediately disqualified by a screening tool?
hmm Yeah, no, that's a great question. What I've seen often for varying reasons of a gap in a resume, there are those who skip over it. You don't, there are some who don't put anything in there, and it works perfectly fine for them. I think it's dependent on your comfortability with how much you want to share. I have seen many resumes, and I think this is the majority of what I see for resumes, are candidates having a similar format to their other experiences in their resume. So, for example, you typically see, employer name, your job title, and, time frame. Um, what I see often for, let's say a medical leave or anything like that, they'll simply put medical leave or sabbatical, even if you're not comfortable sharing the reason why there may be a gap in your resume. You can fill that in with something that still reflects that, you weren't necessarily employed during that time, but you don't need to disclose any personal information. Um, I often see sabbatical being used because that's typically a term that most employers know. But if you are comfortable, I do find that employers and recruiters especially have been uh, really leaning into appreciating transparency and that authenticity, especially depending on where you are applying. If you're applying for a big corporate position, maybe you don't feel as comfortable to disclose that. But if you're applying to a nonprofit that supports individuals with disabilities, maybe you feel more comfortable with that. And it could actually show that you are aligned with that organization and their values. Um, so it's a kind of a non-answer, but hopefully gives you a little bit more insight into how you want to move forward for yourself as a candidate.
Okay, Taylor has a question. How can candidates use AI to actually apply to roles and get past screening in order to get in front of an employer for an interview?
Yes. Um, what I've typically seen for, and having talked to recruiters as well, mixed with my own experience, again, AI isn't necessarily being used to screen resumes, um, but more so finding talent to apply for those roles. And I think this answer will cover kind of both of those sides, where this would fall into your low volume, high impact bucket. And it's taking the time to tailor your materials. It's not something everyone loves hearing. And I'm not saying you need to fully rewrite your resume for each role you want to apply to, but having small adjustments can really make a big difference. For example, if you have on your resume, all of your experiences, you list out the impact that you had, the tools that you used in that role from one industry to another, from one job to another, uh, even same companies in the same industries, terminology is different. And what recruiters may be looking for, or using AI to use to screen resumes are actually keyword filters. And so you may have the same skill set, but if the job description is describing that differently or using a different term to describe that skill, that term is what recruiters will use to screen resumes. And so I'd encourage you when you're tailoring your materials to use similar language that the job description has, because that's the language recruiters will use to filter for skills, experiences as they're going through applications. And then similarly, when they're sourcing for talent online, they'll use that same language and terminology. So including that on your LinkedIn as well.
Great advice. All right, we have another one from the North Star Clubhouse. It says, one more question. Can you recommend resources of how to write a strong LinkedIn profile, particularly for people with very few job experiences or even a first-time job seeker?
Hmm. Yes. Um, I mean, there's definitely a lot of really great resources online. What I would recommend doing, primarily on your LinkedIn profile, is it's very different from your resume. Again, your resume is tailored to that role. It lists your maybe education, your experiences, volunteering, um, those types of experiences. And you can include that on your LinkedIn. But your LinkedIn shows so much more of you as a person. And that's where recruiters are also going to find out who you are beyond your resume. And so I'd encourage you on your LinkedIn to lean into that. Again, we all have our own unique perspective. We have our own lived experiences, and that creates our own sense of a brand that you can really market yourself. And that's what I'd recommend putting onto your LinkedIn. Now, if you're not sure where to start, something I did when I was revamping my own LinkedIn profile from a very basic, um, pretty empty LinkedIn profile, I went on and started finding other professionals that I looked up to. I was looking at professionals that, maybe had jobs that I was interested in, or worked at a company I was interested in, or maybe had similar lived experiences as I did, and took some of those, pieces of their profile and then made it my own. And so while there's lots of resources online, I always find there's nothing really better than using people that are in the community that you are in yourself. And so I would look for inspiration on LinkedIn.
Hey, I do have a couple more questions that I missed, so I'll go back to them. But this last question, it relates to what you're talking about. And it says, any tips on how to detect faked LinkedIn profiles?
Mm. Yes. There are a couple of giveaways or red flags, I think, that especially recruiters look for. One is not having a profile photo, and this can be kind of a hot topic depending. At Willamette, we're a very liberal arts institution, and we actually have a lot of students who don't like having their photo online, especially with the rise of AI. And if you are that person as well, you can put something else there as a placeholder. I've seen people use their own kind of like the emojis that you can make for yourself, or a, you know, cartoon type of, picture for yourself just as a placeholder, because truly having nothing there is a little bit of a red flag to recruiters. Another thing you can do to look to kind of help you identify if it's a fake profile. Um, you are able on most profiles there's like a more button. And then when you click that, you can click on About Profile and you can see when this profile was created. If it was created very, very recently, let's say the photo on there looks a little too perfect, maybe AI generated, Typically those are giveaways that it is a fake profile.
Hey, Andy's asking, do you see resumes being more general than they used to be with the use of AI?
Yes, more general and using very similar language, um, and all looking pretty much the same. You know, you typically see maybe a professional summary, education, experience, volunteer leadership work if that's added, and then a list of skills at the bottom. That's usually the most common format of resume. And while that uh, it is a nice clean look, what I would recommend doing is, again, you can use AI to help you get started, but then going back in and tailoring it to also sound like yourself. We have to remember as candidates that if we do move forward in a recruitment process, we eventually have to talk about our experiences. We have to communicate what's on our resumes. And if my resume had all these big words, complicated phrases on them, it will not sound like me when I'm in an interview because that's not the way I typically communicate or talk. And so they are looking more general because of the use of AI. It's the way it is working is you put it in AI and it learns based on that. And so when the next person comes in, it's essentially feeding itself. And so that typically makes any type of content used by AI or generated by AI to look and sound very similar.
Okay, Ginger's wondering, is it true that you have to apply within 24 hours of a job posting to stand a chance?
Mm. On some level, that can be true. I wouldn't necessarily say like a hard 24 hours. Um, the earlier the better. I would say at least within the first couple of days. And it's mainly because of a few things. I think we're used to seeing jobs be open for an extended period of time. And oftentimes, within the first few days, within the first week, those applications are up in the hundreds. And recruiters will start reviewing them as early as possible to get a jump on reviewing how many applications they will have. And typically, with various, again, laws and regulations, equal employment, they'll start with the earliest job applicants and then move from there. And so the earlier you can apply is typically best. Um, but if you see a position and it's been open for a month, I wouldn't discourage you from applying. I think it's about keeping a balance of our own expectations as candidates to keep our own mental health sustained as we're going through the job recruitment process.
Yeah. Lisa, you have your hand up. Did you want to go ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, so I feel like it was kind of already addressed a little bit, but I was just you recommended or you mentioned earlier about in-person connections with job recruiters and face-to-face and networking and stuff. But what would you recommend to people that have found it difficult to even get access to any in-person contacts? Like I've actually gone to places that were hiring and, tried to follow up with my resume submission, tried to meet the recruiter face to face, and I find I can't even get past the threshold. The front desk person is like, have you applied online? Someone will get back to you. And I just keep, submitting my resume to all these places and never getting past that phase of submission. And I can't even get the interviews if I can't get past that initial phase. And I'm just wondering, like, what would you recommend? Because, like, I've been through so many resume coaches and none of them seem to, agree on the perfect resume. And so
Mhm.
it's like I'm throwing so much at my resume, like, oh, do this, no, don't do that, but do this, but no, no, actually don't do that. And so it's really a lot to take in, and I'm trying to like just meet somebody and be like, hey, because I've been told, I have great interview skills and I'm personable, but if I can't get to that second phase, that actual interview to shine, then I really don't know what else to try.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you're absolutely not the only person in the job market right now who feels that way. And it is very frustrating. And so much of it is because of that rise in applications, where what used to be maybe a couple of hundred applications, and it sounds like a lot, but when I was recruiting, um, I mean, I think for one role, I would sometimes review, 500 applications for one position. Now it's 1,500 applications. And that is very difficult to go through. And so, all of this to say, we can sometimes do everything right. And it doesn't always work. To our advantage. And that is part of why I do like to talk about keeping your own well-being through the process, because it is tough out there. I, again, was very recently on the job market. Having been laid off, I was unemployed for 9 months, or actually almost 12 months before actually starting my position. And similar to you, I was applying to, all these different roles, um, and not hearing back. And yeah, sometimes it's about keeping your own well-being. What I can kind of recommend, and something maybe you've heard already, is going on LinkedIn and or even through some of your own networks and trying to see if you know someone who already works at that organization. Maybe you don't know someone directly, but maybe someone you know knows someone. And it's those connections that can sometimes help you really get through that first door. Um, Especially when, it is so difficult right now and I feel a lot of empathy for both sides of candidates and recruiters, because it is difficult. And so I would really recommend utilizing your own network, your own community. This community here, I think I saw that there were, upwards of 60 something of us on here. Um, Utilizing this network to help you get through that door. If you connect with me on LinkedIn and you're applying somewhere and you see that I have a connection to that organization, a reach out to see, hey, can you get me introduced to someone? And doing that throughout your own network can really help you get through that first door.
Claire, it's almost 11 here. I have like a lot of questions in the chat about LinkedIn. And
Mhm.
I just suggest people connect with you on LinkedIn and ask their questions there because we just really don't have time to go through. One of the big ones that, kind of intrigued me, that our questions intrigued me was like, well, how long should it be? How much information should you give on LinkedIn? And so
Hmm.
there's, a lot of questions like that if you have any other, like, they're asking if you have any other books or any other, directions that they could go to learn more about LinkedIn, which kind of leads me into thinking, hey, maybe our next Get Ahead event needs to be about LinkedIn. But just as a quick wrap, because I do don't want to go over the time here. If you want to kind of address that whole LinkedIn package,
Mhm.
that would be great.
Definitely. Again, with LinkedIn, I think there are not necessarily hard rules, but there are more conventional rules when it comes to resume, cover letter, length, what you cover. LinkedIn is again where you can showcase yourself, your own unique brand, your skills, how you apply them to your passions. And so I don't think there's a hard limit on length. If you looked at mine, you could see my about section. It's pretty long for an about section. If I put that in a document, it would be more than a page of a cover letter. And that's perfectly fine. Um, you also don't have to limit in your experience section the amount of bullet points that you typically would for a resume that you're submitting because it doesn't have to be 1 page long. Your LinkedIn can really be where you put all of your experiences, all of your volunteering, what you enjoy doing. And your about section is kind of like that cover letter where you can share and demonstrate how you're taking those experiences and applying them to what you want to do going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this session. Claire, how you shared your life experiences, how you shared your challenges so that we can relate, to you that like everybody is, struggling right now and trying to figure this all out. And you've shared a lot of great skills. There's a bunch of people signing off that have been thanking us and saying this was a very valuable session. So thank you so much for your time and being with us today, and also all the folks that are here. That's what makes these events great is people that participate and are willing to ask questions and show their vulnerability, in the job market and the struggles they have. So I hope everyone has a great day. Reach out to Claire. She obviously has some, valuable insights to share. And hopefully we'll see you at our next job fair or our next Get Ahead event. And you can also reach out to me as well if you have any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. So I hope everybody has a great day.
Yeah. Thank you so
Bye
much,
for
everyone.
now. Okay, we got lots of thank yous, Claire.
Amazing. Yes, thank you.